Well, welcome to another episode, everybody, of Red Grace Media. This is Emilio Ramos. It's good to be with you. Today on this episode, we're going to be talking about pansexuality and how we approach that in a post-everything world with a new apologetic. Well, welcome to the program, everybody. On this episode, I want to focus on not only pansexuality, but what Scripture has to say regarding the creator and creature distinction, a lot of Romans chapter 1, and we'll talk a little bit about what happens when a movement, now like the LGBTQ movement, becomes militant and how that happens. I'm going to play a couple clips for you to kind of illustrate some of these points. Now, before we talk about all these issues, make sure you hit the bell, subscribe, share this episode with your friends, and never miss an episode. Also, be sure to head over to AGTV, watch agtv.com, and there you can find content by Red Grace Media as well, and watch some of the stuff that we're producing there. Now, as we work through some of this material, it's important for us, as we think about pansexuality, to also think about apologetics. Now, if we think about presuppositional apologetics, I like to think of it in terms of a simple alliteration of 3 A's. That is authority, awareness, and argument. Under authority, of course, we're talking about a person's ultimate authority and whether or not a person has one and what is the nature of a person's ultimate authority. Next is the concept of awareness. Now, awareness is just an easy way of saying that for us in the apologetics task, we have to try to determine, is someone epistemically self-conscious? So instead of saying that long word, we want to use the term awareness, just to say, is this person really understanding the kind of worldview that he or she has? And then finally is the term argument. Now, argument stands in for arguing by way of presupposition or transcendental reasoning. In other words, this is where we get to what we're going to talk about a little bit here today in having an indirect argument for Christianity rather than a direct argument. And what that means is that when you're talking to somebody, let's say, that is trying to argue with you regarding their sexuality, is it more advantageous to approach that person, to tell that person, no, you really don't have those desires, or no, you really were not born that way, or no, you really shouldn't live that way? Or is it better to show them that at the worldview level, they don't have the actual worldview necessary even to interpret sexuality in the first place? I think that's a much more compelling argument. As we work through all this, remember, guys, I mean, just in our culture, as we think about cultural apologetics, it wasn't too long ago, just to understand where we stand, where things have gone, and how quickly the ball has been moved, not only philosophically, but socially speaking, how quickly things have changed and why we are living in unprecedented times. And don't let anybody tell you that you're not. You are living in unprecedented times. It's not that the culture, the world, that the history of humanity has never seen, or the history of Christendom, church history. It's not that we've never seen the issue of homosexuality and sexual deviance before. Oh, we certainly have. But the fact that we have now reached global proportions in everything that we do, technological proportions in everything that we do, it has hit, we're in hyperdrive. We have hit now a whole different scale of, in a sense, of depravity. And it's being merged with what we talked about in one of our early episodes with globalism and pluralism and technological singularity. It's really quite unprecedented what's really going on. But just to think that just a generation ago, it was completely unacceptable to have men and women and women walking down the street together, holding hands, let alone getting married. And so our times have absolutely changed. Pansexuality, therefore, is just an accurate description about what is going on in our culture today, and as we have called it, in a post-everything world, how that a pagan and therefore a pansexuality is really what is becoming, what is emerging before our very eyes. Now, just because we talk about post-everything culture, you know, what that really means is people today really hold their positions, their worldview, their arguments, their convictions without conviction, their arguments without an argument, their logic without logic. We have really become, as we stated before in previous episodes, we've really become narcissistic, we've become nihilistic, and we have become hedonistic. And the philosophical has begun to kind of wear off. And in a post-everything world where we've even become now post-secular, what people are being given is sort of this pseudo-spirituality to try to marry that on top of what's going on in the culture today with things like sexuality. And so, regardless of where we are in the culture today, the comforting thing from a Christian perspective is that Romans chapter 1, and all of Scripture really, but particularly Romans chapter 1, as we consider what it means for man to lose that creator and creature distinction, to enter into a pantheistic worldview, it's very comforting for us as Christians to know that Romans chapter 1 absolutely applies and identifies what's going on in the world around us today. Now, when it comes to the philosophy of sexual ethics in the culture, where do we go, in other words, to get our guidance and our discernment and to know how to assess what's happening? Because it does no good to go to the culture itself. It does no good to go to sociology, to go to science, to go to political opinions. Those things simply don't go deep enough. The issue of pansexuality is first and fundamentally a religious issue. We don't need, therefore, to begin in the realm of sociology or science or politics. It's only in God's revelation that anthropology makes sense, that we can situate it and put it in its actual proper context to understand it, and then to be able to know how to minister that to our neighbor today. If we don't pursue sexuality in a proper biblical anthropological context, then we will fail to understand the spiritual nature of sexuality in its entirety and how it fits in the revelation of God. Now, ironically, sexuality is becoming increasingly spiritual or pagan, even the attempted Christianized versions of pansexuality, especially as we consider this whole push to eliminate the binary, to do away with gender distinctions, and to make a space for people to try to identify in quasi-categories, anthropologically speaking. Now, as our culture adopts more and more of this non-binary type of thinking for human anthropology and human sexuality, it will become more and more spiritual in its dynamic and ultimately, therefore, pagan. Now, as we think about the LGBTQ movement and what it is, I think we have to be honest about the way that movement works today. And the way that movement works today is mainly politically. It has become a political weapon. It's become a political tool. It has become a political tool in the hands of people that have stated or unstated agendas with said or unsaid consequences. Now, that acronym is not only evolving and increasing in terms of letters and numbers and symbols, but it's also become a self-refuting, unsustainable concept, even for those that use the term. The letters, the symbols, they just keep growing, and so does the confusion. Now, that's not difficult to see given what Paul says in Romans chapter 1 in terms of being foolish in their speculations and people's hearts being darkened. And what does that look like exactly? Well, here's a sample of what some of that looks like, and make sure to pay attention to the language that's being used here. Now, fair warning, I'll give you a warning if you have kids in the room. If we try to keep this as a family show, but if you have kids, you may want to preview this before you show this to your children. It's quite disturbing, but I think it's necessary just to see exactly how this pansexuality is emerging today.
I will never apologize for standing up for an LGBTQ2 plus kids' rights to not have to undergo conversion therapy.
This is Ari, Gwendolyn and Brynnifer. They are in a polyamorous relationship and they all parent Hazel and Sparrow.
We have a 2-year-old antigender baby and a 10-year-old who is non-binary.
They have chosen not to disclose Sparrow's gender.
We don't know it yet. It's something that Sparrow's gonna have to figure out and then tell us.
But their parenting approach is controversial.
I have literally received death threats. Crazy, crazy lady. I hope karma hits you back and your kids grow up to detest you.
I know that it's not easy to watch something like that. I know it's not easy to see something like that. I mean, think about what is being said there. This is now what qualifies for an extraordinary family. This is now what qualifies. And as a matter of fact, like Trudeau, that's exactly how they want us all talking. They want us all literally falling over ourselves and capitulating to the most radical, unbiblical lifestyles imaginable, until finally we are completely bullied into the corner so that we have to constantly apologize for misgendering somebody or not using the right pronouns or failing to recognize what's all in the acronym in terms of these quote unquote alternative ways of living and alternative sexualities. This is a world, dear friends, in complete and total rebellion to God. And even more than that, this is a world that has been, as Paul talks about there in Romans chapter 1, this is a world that has been given over by God. It's being handed over to a reprobate mind. And at the root of the confusion of our culture regarding sexuality, if we just follow the logic of Romans 1, of course, at the very root of it is idolatry. It is the failure to see God as the God who interprets all facts, all truths, including things that deal with anthropology and sexuality. And because we cannot understand a single article of truth apart from God, the article of sexuality must be a religious issue before it is anything. We have to take it to that level of analyzing that issue within that worldview, that ethical, moral concept or subject or issue. We have to analyze that in light of who God is and what he has said about himself and about the world, about the creator and the creature distinction. Now, once the idolatrous exchange of Romans 1 has taken place, culture now has to seek to interpret everything on its own, by itself. But given that they are in a spiritually darkened condition, in a spiritually darkened state, we know that the art of predication itself is impossible. And really what happens is at any time that a non-Christian person, a non-Christian articulation of some argument or a position on something having to do with philosophy or worldview seeks to use facts, use logic, use any sort of concepts like distinctions and truth and reason and logic and those kinds of things, we understand that they have to borrow from the principles that reside within the biblical worldview in order to do that. Now, that's some of the old, that is presuppositional apologetics. That is classic Van Til right there. That predication is not possible in your worldview unless you borrow first from the Christian worldview. And that's something we have to constantly point out to people in an apologetic where we use not just the authority, not just the awareness of epistemology, but also the argument of presuppositional apologetics to show them that without Christianity, their worldview really doesn't make any sense. And I think this is even more beneficial. I mean, when we're talking about pansexuality, when we're talking about these issues, unbiblical forms of sexuality, is it better to talk to a person about whether or not they're same-sex attracted? Is it better to talk to a person about whether or not they have these impulses, whether or not they were born that way, let's say? Or is it better to say, look, I challenge you not on this one issue, one area in your life concerning your behavior, but I want to challenge you in the totality of your worldview. I want to know that you are self-aware of who you are. I want to know, do you even understand the authority to which you appeal? And I want you to know, every time you borrow from the Christian worldview, you advance my position. I think that's a much better way to approach the whole conversation of sexuality. Like, look, for us, the other thing that's important here is to understand the compromise of the church on this issue. Peter Jones has pointed out here that recently there was a poll taken where 40% of college-age career students in the evangelical church, 40% now believe that gay marriage is a legitimate marriage and that God is accepting of that. And as a matter of fact, in his book, Whose Rainbow, a wonderful book that you ought to get, in that book, he talks about Julia Rogers, who used to be a chaplain at Wheaton College. And the Huffington Post did an article on her when she came out in support of same-sex marriage. This is what she had to say back then, 2016. She said, same-sex couples are getting married, and many of those couples are decisively Christian. No amount of disagreement with these marriages will invalidate their Christ-like example of love and faithfulness. After all, that is what a Christian marriage is all about. Now, that's what she said then. Thankfully, she was removed from her post, or she quit. I can't remember which one it was. But at anyway, she's not at Wheaton anymore, thankfully. And hopefully Wheaton will correct the possibility of having somebody like Rogers there on their staff or their faculty. But notice the language. When she says no amount of disagreement with these marriages will invalidate their Christ-like example of love and faithfulness. What Julia Rogers is saying is that this is a militant issue, and you can argue till you're red or blue in the face, and you will get nowhere. And what she is saying is that that's okay. Matter of fact, what she would say is it is wrong to try to convince, to try to disagree with what she calls marriages, because after all, they have a Christ-like example of love and faithfulness. I mean, this is what we're up against today. This is what is going on in a post-everything culture. And when the church is being sucked into the vortex of a post-secular world, where now the name of the game is no longer any kind of critical, logical thinking, but rather pure and sheer unadulterated hedonism. That is the guiding principle. Now, look, I'm going to show you a video here in a second just to show you just how confused, just how low the conversation has really become. And it should really terrify us from the Christian perspective that there are actual Christian people trying to accommodate some of these positions, trying to argue for the gay Christian and the same-sex attracted believer who is simultaneously faithful to the gospel because he or she is remaining celibate as a gay Christian. Now, we're in trouble. I mean, these are troubling times. But one thing that Peter Jones points out in his books, especially The Other Worldview, and this book that I just referenced here a moment ago, Whose Rainbow by Peter Jones, is that sexuality becomes part of human expression. And what that means is that a person is saying, my preferred mode of sexuality, whether it's being transgender, whether it's being homosexual, whether it's being bisexual, or whatever it may be, that is part of me being human. It is tantamount to my humanity. And so if we're keeping our eye on the ball, so to speak, if we're watching where the argument is going, suddenly there's been a shift in the argument. The argument has shifted from talking about sexuality in particular to now talking about anthropology in a comprehensive fashion. This is what happens in a world that is deconstructed and in a post-everything culture. This is exactly where things go. They go to a complete redefinition, a redefining of everything. And therefore, we have to be prepared to meet these kind of arguments at the worldview level. Now, this is a video, and again, Again, I showed you these videos just for the sake of understanding how low and how and how the thinking is going today among young people and the rising generation. I believe there will come a time in the rising generations where these kinds of conversations will advance to such a degree that for you to deny somebody the right to identify in whatever category they want, male, female, we'll get to the point where a person wants to identify as a certain age, as a certain species, human, not human. And this is what happens in a post-everything world. Watch.
Whole variety of experiences that people have that cause them to question, like, hey, maybe I don't actually fit into the definition of, man or woman, and that there's something else.
Hi, I'm Danny and I identify as non-binary.
I'm Lindsay and I identify as non-binary.
My name is Feng. I identify as non-gendered person.
I'm Francois. I identify as genderqueer.
My name is James and I identify as non-binary.
Non-binary is someone whose gender doesn't fall within the context of the binary that we set up in society.
I am not male, I'm not female, I'm somewhere floating around in there.
Non-binary means acknowledging a wider range of experience.
For me, it means that I'm not identified with any specific gender, like male, female, or other things.
It's part of a larger kind of goal of questioning these assumptions about gender and questioning why there only need to be two.
It gives me the freedom to express myself. If I wake up one day and I want to spike my hair and do punk rock makeup, I can do it.
Every couple of decades, some designer decides that men's shorts are, suddenly 5 inches shorter or 5 inches longer. In the 70s, if you look at what men were wearing, they were like Rockettes, like shorts were up to here, and now it's like, get it, down to the knee. Non-binary is freedom from that whole game. It's like, I don't care what the men's department at Marshall's suddenly has decided that like men need to wear. I'm gonna go for what makes me feel more authentic.
I tend to say gender is dependent on context and point of view.
To me, it just makes me comfortable that I can just be this body that I have.
I identified as a cis gay male. Cisgender is when your gender identity aligns with the gender that you were assigned at birth based on your anatomy. I saw myself as a cis man and just thought, well, I paint my nails and I wear lipstick, but I'm a cis man. And I knew what genderqueer was and non-binary. I knew of them and I was like, I support it, I love it, but it's over there, that's not me.
I identified as male before. I didn't really ever feel comfortable fitting into the masculine or male environments or just seeing myself as a man.
I've always had questions as a child. I always would put on my mother's makeup and her lipstick.
I identified quite a while before I came out to people.
I started identifying as non-binary when I was 17. I just knew that calling myself a woman and calling myself a girl did not feel accurate and did not feel good and did not feel like a home to me at that time in my life anymore.
Most people are still very confused about trans identity, non-binary, gender fluid.
Even though it's 2019, it's not something that everybody runs and be like, oh, you're genderqueer, yay, hugs and kisses, we love you still.
The hardest thing about coming out at 17 is no one believes you. Everyone is like, wow, that's a really cute phase you're having.
Even when I'm saying what I identify with, people still have a specific imagination of what that means.
Most people are going to assume that you're one of two genders, a man or a woman. And so every single day, you have to be correcting them and you have to be declaring that you're non-binary to pretty much every new person that you meet.
People often misgender me. Like the second I leave New York, I get called ma'am, like to my face.
A lot of times people get pronouns right twice, and then I find it's often the third time that people start slipping.
A lot of people think that we're transitioning for some reason.
Some people say, oh, so are you going through transition right now? And some people ask me, so do you...
Simplest way to ask about gender if you don't know someone is,
Hey friend, what are your pronouns? That's it.
A lot of us are very different. Some people are like, don't misgender me, and it's a big thing. And I understand that, really, I do.
Personally, I'm always very open and happy to talk to people about it.
I remember a few times I went on job interviews and I dressed like how I am. And I did very, very well in the first interview. And they're like, oh, you did so well. Just when you come next time, can you dress like a boy? It's especially challenging in dating.
No one really knows how to deal with you and whether they're allowed to be attracted to you, really.
Some people, they just say they want to date men.
the worst is whenever someone's like, well, yeah, but you will be very fixated with anatomical gender.
You can't be seen as heterosexual, you can't be seen as homosexual. And so when you try to date a girl, it's like, you're too feminine and you're not masculine enough. And you try to date a guy who's gay and he's like, you're not masculine enough, or you're too feminine or something. It's always something.
I think people's knowledge of this is definitely getting a lot better with time.
We're becoming more relatable. People are seeing us for who we are. And so I think that brings about this general air of acceptance.
I think the future of gender identity, hopefully, is one where we don't force the binary on everybody.
I think the future of gender identity is so much more like colorful and wide and different and like varied as we think it even can be.
I hope that the future will move towards more of individual expression rather than this mob mentality to follow the crowd to be like everybody else.
I definitely wish that we can all just pass through this phase of trying to categorize people and just take them as what they are.
Being able to reclaim our narratives, I think that's the next step, is that trans voices are the ones speaking for trans people and non-binary voices become the ones speaking for non-binary people.
Now notice the utter implosion of the worldview by these individuals. Notice that one of them says, I just want to be the body that I have. And it's amazing that if you really watch what happened in the logic of that video, the reduction of the worldview, it becomes a philosophical defeater of sorts, because it moves from a sort of moral relativism to a closet nihilism, where really it is self-destructive. And ironically, in the pursuit of self-authenticity and self-expression, the self is lost in the end. This individual says, I just want to be the body that I have. That individual has been reduced to nothing but a body, so that no longer is that person really whole. There is not a holistic way of looking at yourself as being created in the image of God, body and soul. Somebody that's been created in the image of God and for God's glory, with an eternal destiny and with infinite meaning, because they're made in God's image. And all of that is gone. The dignity of man, the meaning of man, the value of man. Now, this person just wants to be the body that they have. It's remarkable. The other person says, it just didn't feel right to me anymore to be male or female. Now notice again the fact that this exposes the emotional subjectivism that drives this person and the mysticism that this results in. This notion of feeling and experience-driven logic applied consistently, this will quickly wreck not just your worldview, but it will wreck the fabric of society itself. What if people woke up one day and said, well, you know what? Not only do I agree with you on that point, but I don't feel like being married to one person anymore. I don't feel like being a responsible parent. I don't feel like being an honest employee. I don't feel like paying my taxes this year. I don't feel like being a mother or a father, a son or a daughter. Where does this end? I don't feel as if I'm human today. I don't feel like an adult. I feel like a child. And I know that on the internet you can go and you can find any Looney Tune sort of Twilight Zone expression of all of that. I'm sure that the examples abound, but it's just that Romans 1 digression that when you exchange the glory of the eternal God, the blessed God, when you exchange the glory of God, what you're left with is idolatry. The other individual says that and really exposing now where the worldview leads, not just to a personal subjectivism, a personal emotionalism, but even more than that, now it leads to this whole area of a militant outworking of their theoretical worldview, because this individual says you have to go around all day correcting people. They say you have to correct people every day. And so that's exactly what they want. They want us all to go along with their stated philosophy. And if you don't, not only are you opposing their worldview, but now you are hostile to their worldview, and you need to be corrected. You see, not every view will be included in the non-binary world. See, notice the contradiction. Not everybody apparently is entitled to their own view of what human bodies are. Not everybody is entitled to their own view regarding human sexuality. No, unless you embrace this new radical, liberal, and completely relativistic type of self-destructive worldview, you're to be renounced, rejected, and corrected. The other person says, it's always something. It's always something about people getting them wrong, so that we never really come to understand them. There's always something, because we're always doing something wrong as we hold on to our old, stubborn, traditional beliefs. It's like 2,000 years of world history, 4,000 years of world history, 6,000 years of world history. Everybody's been wrong on these issues, and this new generation is the ultimate and enlightened generation that will lead us into a non-binary future. It really is getting to that point. That's exactly what's going on. The collision course of worldviews, therefore, is unavoidable. Truth is exclusive. A person's philosophical assumptions matter. They matter. That is what these folks are really teaching us here. Regardless of how dastardly the non-binary claims of these people are, they cannot escape the inevitable dilemma of the binary nature of reality. So this then becomes the way the culture advertises all these lifestyles to our children. And increasingly, and especially in public schools, children are being told in order to be truly be themselves, they must outwardly express their sexual impulses, whatever they may be, explore with sexual identities, and even prefer something other than heterosexuality in the traditional sense. Now compound this with the fact that other than heterosexual lifestyles are glorified in the culture. They are put on pedestals and idolized. It's amazing that the actual percentage of people who actually identify as homosexual in the population in the United States is probably less than 2% of the population. We're all made to feel as if this population requires total egalitarian equality, even, truth be told, virtually supremacy over all other populations in the country. It's absolutely it's absolutely dastardly what's going on in the culture with this respect. Now, this leads in the direction for us to ask some theological questions here, some eschatological questions here, some questions about pneumatology, some questions about anthropology from Scripture that help us to understand our doctrine of sin and our doctrine of the fall and our doctrine of this present age and what it consists of. See, it's amazing to me that Scripture is so crystal clear what it is that faces the church in the 21st century. It's so absolutely crystal clear that we are being told that our ultimate enemies are not CRT, BLM, LGBTQ, socialism, communism, or the social credit score, or the DNC, or the World Economic Forum, or the New World Order, or the left or the right, the rhinos or the dumbbells, whatever it may be. But it is an antichrist spirit that incurs the wrath of God on a God-hating world. It is the spirit of the age. It is the spirit of this present evil age. It is the spirit of Antichrist. And it's amazing to me, this is the benefit of studying biblical theology, that you get something like the doctrine of Antichrist. And though we can debate all of the particular traditional eschatological positions here, from a biblical theological perspective, we understand that Antichrist is a principle that began in the garden with the anti-Lord. And then you see different alliterations of that very thing. You see that at Babel, in the land of Shinar, you see that Nimrod becomes something of an antichrist crisis and an antichrist figure that arises. You see the same thing in Pharaoh, who is identified in antichrist terms. You see the same thing in the king of Babylon. You see the same thing in Nebuchadnezzar. You see the same thing in the kingdoms of Daniel. You see the same things in Rome with Caesar. And what it constructs for us is this antichrist theology that what redemptive history has shown us is that we live in an antichrist age with a coming antichrist, with a coming antichrist crisis that will be resolved only by the Lord Jesus Christ. It also leads us in the direction, dear friends, that we're heading towards a antichrist system in the Bible, Revelation 17 and 18, known as Babylon, that I believe is still future and is an encroaching reality, maybe even an intensifying reality as the system takes shape over the centuries until at last it reaches that final ultimate antichrist manifestations. We know that the spirit of the age, we understand that the present evil world, the present evil age is tantamount to Romans 8 and the birth pains that are described there. We know that this is a description that Paul gives of the last days, that difficult times will come, a description of the entire interadvental period before Christ returns. And therefore, when we see what's happening in our culture, we understand that the world is increasingly being given over to a onist, pagan, pantheistic philosophy, and that philosophy is ultimately antichrist in nature. What does that do for us in terms of our apologetics, in terms of our evangelism? What that does for us is that we don't approach things simply to address CRT, simply to address BLM, simply to address the LGBTQ crowd, the socialists, the communists, the fascists, the leftists, the technocracy, and the medical tyranny, or whatever might come our way next. But we understand fundamentally that beneath all of that is a spirit. And that spirit is the spirit of Antichrist. And that spirit is congruent with the spirit of this age. And the spirit of this age is congruent, coextensive with the sons of disobedience, so that no sooner will you get rid of the sons of disobedience, that you will get rid of this present evil age and the Antichrist spirit that is now at work in them. You know, one of the things that I prepared today is to talk about how that in a post-everything world, in a post-Christian culture, in a pagan culture, what is filling that void is not simply anarchy. It doesn't lack organization. There is an organization, and that organization can be thought about in terms of a globalist, Eastern, pagan spirituality that's coming, that's seen in what we talked about in terms of a pagan sexuality, the elimination of the binary. When you have the Archbishop in England talking about God who is a gender neutral God, when you have videos of children now practicing yoga, when you have billboards where Satanists are allowed to talk about their child sacrifice and abortion. This is a world in the clutches of overt paganism. At Apple events, where the majority of the Apple event is spent on how technology will be integrated into every single aspect of your life. And even within the Apple events, there are special apps that they're preparing for you so that you can engage in Eastern meditation and yoga. It's absolutely amazing, but that the organization that is emerging is an Eastern pagan organization. It's an organization that is encouraging pantheism. It's an organization that is encouraging occultism. It's an organization that is encouraging Satanism. The entertainment industry is becoming increasingly pagan, pedophilic, and satanic. More and more legislation is being created to accommodate all forms of spirituality, religious pluralism, even the most extreme, like overt Satanism, no longer taboos, since both the church and society are doing little or nothing to oppose it. Many Christians have no problem whatsoever praying with people from other religions. Most people don't realize that the gay agenda is actually rooted in the Eastern concept of eliminating the binary, which is a pagan Hindu idea that says not two, but one. In other words, not two, a patent rejection of God and creation, but one, everything is the eternal one, God, man, creation, all joined together in nature worship and nature deification. This is why Romans chapter 1 has to be something that we never leave off studying. In everything that we study in apologetics, and in as much as we get into formal logic, as much as we study textual criticism, as much as we study epistemology, as much as we get into all these different fields of apologetics and all these different fields of study, we never leave off the theology of Romans, because there the Apostle Paul gave us the creator and creature distinction, and everything hinges on that. And when that distinction is blurred, then the creator and creature relation is corrupted. And in the new apologetic, that's exactly what we have to address. The new apologetic is all about reaching people where they're at, what they're thinking. And like I said at the very outset, most people today lack the conviction, they lack the arguments, they lack the logic, they lack the commitment to any one philosophical idea. They toggle between opinions. They are quite comfortable living with being in a self-refuting system of thought. They are perfectly comfortable with the illogical. They're in what Van Til called the rational and irrational dialectic. They have no problem banging on the table, demanding evidence and facts from the Christian, let's say, but then abandoning all facts when they are asked to account for their own worldview. In the new apologetic, we have to understand that we're dealing with people who have accepted a culture and a worldview that is essentially pagan and pantheistic. There's a universal sameness that now permeates the culture around us. The air that people breathe today is a pagan one. And the militancy of the age can be encountered any time that you insist on any hard, fast distinctions in reality. The hostility is getting worse, touching on such fundamental distinctions as male and female, human and non-human. This is the depth to which we need the gospel to penetrate in people's hearts and minds. This is the focus that requires specific prayer so that we can overcome the dizzying darkness of our day. So it will not come by entering into shouting matches with people on a direct level, but it needs to come at the worldview level where we challenge people comprehensively to understand why they exist, why they're here, why they were made, who they are fundamentally according to God's word, and where they are going eschatologically as we restore an eschatological vision in the whole field of anthropology. In the next episode, we're going to focus on spirituality. We're going to talk about how spirituality is changing in a post-everything culture, how religious pluralism is now becoming the very identity of American culture, and for the rest of the world, we'll look at the implications of that for the rest of the world as well.